All right, so let me get into Dr. Jeff's bio. So we have Dr. Jeffrey Young, who graduated from the Colorado State University School of Veterinary Medicine in 1989. He established Planned Pethood Plus Incorporated, PPP, in 1990. PPP is best known for its low-cost mobile neutering services, Native American reservation work, and training of veterinarians from around the world in more efficient surgical techniques. Dr. Young has served on or consulted with numerous Humane Society boards nationally and internationally. He has founded his own nonprofit group called Planned Pethood International. Planned Pethood International was established to help fund spay neuter work and veterinary training involving numerous veterinary hospitals and veterinary schools around the world. PPI has a well established international training center in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, offering free training for qualified candidates and having had hundreds of veterinarians and veterinary students come for hands-on training. Dr. Young is most proud of having performed over 200,000 surgeries in the last 35 years, and he is an outspoken proponent of early age neutering for companion animal population control. Dr. Young has a popular TV show on Animal Planet called Dr. Jeff, Rocky Mountain Vet. He has used this platform to promote population control and basic medical needs for all companion animals. Dr. Young is driven by a simple underlying mission to significantly reduce companion animal overpopulation and suffering throughout the world. His motto, think globally, act locally.
I always start out with this slide. This came out of Europe, but it's the 5 freedoms. And I think we got to look at this from the standpoint of, are we talking shelter animals, individually owned animals? There's just different circumstances, but in the end, we all want the same thing. And I've been a kind of a critic of no-kill shelters, but I do believe freedom from fear and distress is not always available to animals in crowded situations. We see that a lot around the world. But, look over the definitions there of shelter, rescue, save. It should be about protecting, taking out of a dangerous situation. My idea of a perfect shelter is one that doesn't have to collect animals from, the surrounding environment, but, is there for, say, a relative dies and no one can take care of their animal, or there's a storm and, you have to go out and help animals that way. To me, that's what a shelter is for, is to rescue those kind of animals in severe distress or danger, and to get them back to the original owners or to new owners. So, we're going to approach this from a couple of different perspectives, but let's move on. These are kind of the big wigs in spay neuter. I'm a real fan of all of them, and look at their research on a pretty regular basis. Some of this, I know Dr. Bushby has retired now, but he's still actively out there lecturing and talking about stuff. And these guys have a lot more credentials than I do behind their names. But at the same time, I got the real life practical experience, and I do think there's a lot of conflict in the literature that's developed. For 30 years, spay neuter was the thing to do, and there was very little pushback. It was, about 75, 85 to 15 to 25% against, and 75, 85% pro. There were a few articles here and there, but in the last 10 years, there's been some pushback on spay neuter. And I think it's just been kind of the dropping the ball, because we literally went from killing in the 70s anywhere from 24 to 26 million animals a year, dogs and cats. Depending on who you want to believe nowadays, shelter information says as low as 1 million to 4 million now, up to 6 million. I think we've always killed more than we've ever estimated. And I think the growing trend now, that my concern is the economic euthanasia. So overpopulation is still an issue and will continue to be. And my feeling is no animal should be put to sleep for just being born. I think it's something that we as humans have failed at. I look at prepubertal, and how do you define prepubertal? I would say, if you ask the average vet, what age do you spay neuter an animal? Most of them don't know. I mean, are they going to say they arbitrarily pick a year and a half, 6 months? Your 6 months to a year is the most common, and that has all been arbitrary. It's been handed to us. What's the data behind it? What's the science behind it? Most vets don't have a clue, and most veterinary schools don't have a clue. It's been arbitrary for years. They talked about the bloodless spay at the turn of the century, back in the early 1900s. So we know pre-pubertal animals have been done, and the idea of doing younger animals really came out of Medford, Oregon, where the local vet realized that he kept spay and neuter animals as adults, but they'd adopt out puppies and kittens, and then they'd have litters before they got spayed or neutered, and just it was an ongoing process. So at some point, he decided, look, let's start doing these younger animals so they can never have litters, and that's really the start of pre-pubertal spay neuter, and it swept across the nation, and it was very effective in reducing, the millions of animals that we killed. But it's still a tool, and we use it all the time. In Colorado, you cannot adopt before 8 weeks of age, and many states I think have the same rule, and it should be a rule everywhere. There's just no rationale to be adopting an animal before 8 weeks of age in an ideal world. So, and think if you're owned animal, so you go out and you get your dog from somewhere that's not spayed or neutered, so you didn't get it from a shelter, in my mind. But let's say you got your dog somewhere from a friend. Most people get their animals from friends or relatives, a very high percentage of people. So you go to your vet, you get your deworming, your shots, all that. You have a veterinary relationship. I think 5 months is the real age that I push for my owned animals, as a veterinarian at a practice. And I think it's rational because they've had all their shots. They've seen me a couple times, and I think it's a rational thing to do. Pre-pubertal spay neuter is, I consider less than 6 months, is slowly rising, and more people are doing it. At the same time, we have more and more humane societies. In Colorado, you're not allowed to adopt an animal for 8 weeks of age, but if you're a shelter in a small rural community, you don't have a vet that'll do it or can do it or doesn't want to do it, or maybe you don't have a vet at all, then there's a loophole in the law where you can go ahead and adopt them out because you don't have the availability to get it done. So a lot of those kind of loopholes exist, which still is like shooting ourselves in the foot, creates more and more problems. On the road, when I go to reservations and places like that, my 5 months is not 5 months, it's 5 weeks. I go down to about 5 weeks, and I've had no, negative repercussions from that. I don't see a whole lot of difference between 5 months and 5 weeks, other than the 5 months will bounce back quicker than anything. So it's a positive thing, and it can be done. We're going to get further discussion in terms of what animals are best for that. The veterinary profession, what age and why. Once again, the standard for years has been 6 to 12 months. There's no science behind it, and about 80% of what we do is based on science. There's more and more push to look at the data and to evaluate more, not just do things because that's the way it's always been done. And the big thing is like correlation versus causation. I always like this stat. So as the sale of ice cream goes up in New York City, so does the murder rate. And based on that, you'd say, okay, then let's not sell ice cream, and therefore the murder rate will go down. Well, that's not the case. Obviously, that's ridiculous. But the reason for the sale of ice cream going up and the murder rate going up is the temperature goes up. And the temperature goes up, people tend to be more hot-headed, literally. And ice cream tends to be something people like to eat more when it's really hot outside. So it makes sense when you look at the underlying cause. But that's a correlation, not a causation. And a lot of our research is correlative. It's not causative. Yoga and diabetes. People who do yoga have a much lower risk or have a much lower incidence of diabetes. Well, that's not because yoga prevents diabetes, but because people who do yoga tend to just eat healthier and have overall healthier environments around them. So, those things can be figured out. So always take everything with a grain of salt. Unfortunately, our science has kind of it's been bought and paid for in a lot of ways, and we just don't get a lot of good causation type studies, which is so it's something that we need to look at and question. Retrospective studies versus prospective. There's one built prospective study, and that's the golden retriever study. And I haven't seen anything coming out of there that's negative about spay neuter yet. And it's been going on for quite a few years. Retrospective is more common, and most studies are retrospective, and that's where they do surveys. They look back and they do a questionnaire, and it's usually at major universities. So those are referral institutions. So they're already getting a skewed population to begin with, because not everybody's going to take their animal to a university for, say, a knee surgery or whatever the case may be. There's a supply and demand issue. As veterinarians, we really want to increase our value in society, increase the animal's value in society. Then, this lower the surplus. So to me, it's not altruistic to want to spay and neuter. It makes sense to me. It's better for the animals, and it's better for me as a veterinarian. Millions of pets live in low-income areas, and in those areas, and this is exactly what I'm talking about, 87% aren't fixed, 77% never see a vet. And let's say they do, some, 23, 24% do go to a local vet. They're not going to go to a referral institution. They're never going to be included into a study. And there's millions of pets, and vast majority of those animals are not fixed. So once again, a fixed animal in a higher income level is much more likely to get a referral than an unfixed animal in a rural or underserved area. So therefore, once again, the surveys you're doing are skewed, and that's the important thing to keep in mind. The last 3 decades, veterinarians as a profession, we all are busy, we're making money, but we're seeing the smaller percentage of animals overall. There's more animals in America, but we're still seeing a smaller percentage. So we've really let down on our job with helping the average person get veterinary care. Bob Christensen did a study and came up with a conclusion that about 40% of people can afford current veterinary prices. And I've heard recently a lot of people saying I can never get into their animal again because I can't afford it. The number one reason for people not getting an animal fixed is cost. Plain and simple, is cost. So, all right. These are the realities in my mind. Over 60% of puppies given away, this is one study, are given away within a calendar year, because people get a puppy and, God, you couldn't pay me to have a puppy. So, and I understand why you want to give them away. Humane societies are adopting, 25, 30% of animals. So we need to get that number up. Contracts are very ineffective. In Pueblo, Colorado, the first year they had a contract, less than 30% took advantage of it, that were adopting out animals unspayed or neutered. And almost all the vets in the community were, signed up, and they got paid really pretty good money for doing the spay neuter, but the people just weren't bringing them in. So that's the thing to keep in mind. Dogs are 15 times, cats are 45 times more prolific than humans. We cannot breed fast enough to keep up with handing everybody a puppy and kitten. So that's the reality I deal with. And it makes more sense to get them fixed so we don't have to have all these animals backed up and being killed. Greater than 90% of cats are fixed, greater than 80% of dogs are fixed in America. So once again, think about the skewed statistics. If you do a survey, of 100 animals, 80% of those, 80 out of 100 are going to be fixed more than likely, which means, you're going to have 8, let's say you're looking at torn cranial-cruciate ligaments. Okay, you should probably get 8 to 4, or 8 to 2, I'm sorry, would be the ratio, if the statistics are about the same, if the incidence is about the same. We don't look at that when we do those stats. So once again, things are biased. Number one cause of companion animal still remains euthanasia. And once again, the vets would come out of the, their hair would catch on fire if animals were dying at that rate, that we were taking care of. So it's something that needs to change. About 80% of animals in shelters are not fixed. I think it's probably a little bit lower now, but there's no question that a dog is 3 times more likely to be given over to a shelter, and cats are 4 times more likely to be given over to a shelter if they're intact. You can read there that 40% of dog litters are unplanned and 90% of cat litters are unplanned. Cats are great at reproducing. Just remember that, 45 times more prolific than humans. They're amazing at reproducing. That's the one thing they do really well. This is kind of a busy chart, but this just goes over positive, negative effects. I'll be the first to admit you see a little bit more incontinence, but once again, it's breed related, larger breeds and more female than male. Those are things we can deal with, but it's about twice the amount, the number, but it still exists. It's out there. Obesity is a big one. All my animals were fixed, and I've had several animals fixed at a very young age. I've never had an obese animal. So there you go. It's exercise. There's no special solution here. You feed them less and you exercise them more. My dog is currently on the farmer's diet, I think it's called, but he loves it and he does great on it. So urinary continence, I'll give the researchers that it's a little bit higher. Hemangiosarcoma, osteosarcoma. We're going to go through all these different diseases specifically. Thyroid disease is out there, but it represents 0.2% and it's breed related. So when things are breed related, you got to question, okay, we're breeding these things into them. So if we bred them differently, would this go away? And obviously the answer is very possible. And yes, medically wise, we know breast cancer is the #1 cancer in female dogs. One heat cycle increases their breast cancer chance 7-fold. Pyometers, I do a pyometer almost every day. It's just ridiculous the number of pyometers I see. And that's because people charge so much money for them right now. And so they bring them into us. And any animal, it's very common in female dogs over 9 years of age, and a large percentage of them can die. Knock on wood, I've had a lot of luck with them, but you got to give them a lot of antibiotics, and it's a very life-threatening disease. Prostatitis, male dogs, it's very common. Vaginal prolapse, perianal hernias. Perianal hernias are always in intact male dogs, almost always. And the first thing you do is you neuter them. Ovarian cysts, you got that grumpy cat. You give me a grumpy cat that's 4 or 5 years old and hadn't been fixed, and I'll show you a big ovarian cyst every time. So it's very common. TVT, infectious diseases. We know that bites hit by cars, something like 80% of the dogs hit by cars are intact animals, and mostly males. They're like young teenage boys. They're out on Friday night getting in trouble, and so they get hit by a car or get into fights. We know every longevity study ever shown that cats live longer, 3 to 5 years longer, dogs 1 to 2 years longer on average. And that is significant later on as we go over. Pros and cons. So Banfield did this study back in 2013 at 2.2 million dogs. It's the biggest study ever done, really. And once again, it's a questionnaire, 460,000 cats, it's the animals that have come through their doors. But if you look there, the longevity, male cats 62% longer. That's significant. UC Davis has put out a lot of kind of negative type stuff. The golden retriever, the lab versus golden, is all these different studies. You can look them all up. But the funny thing is, a lot of this was funded by the AKC, and in the last 10 years, the pushback in terms of spay neuter has come a lot from UC Davis and a few other universities. But it also coincides with the lowest registration of people in the AKC, the American Kennel Club. So, are these related? Probably in some respects. There's politics involved in everything. But their own study, the UC Davis study that went from 1989 to 2016, all right, age was more of an effect than reproductive status on mortality. Think about that, what that just said. And this is, even though they come out with all these other studies that say there's problems here, problems there, the bottom line is age has more an effect. Oh, and those animals live longer that are fixed? Yes, they do. So therefore, that's an issue. The Banfield study is pretty amazing. And you have these other studies up there. And once again, you can look at them. And they are very interesting, and some of them are not long enough. Do you follow them out? It gets really expensive to follow an animal from birth to death, and to follow hundreds of animals from birth to death. So, but these retrospective studies are, are interesting, and there's a few prospective studies, but they don't go very long, So, but immediate results are, once again, spay neuter seems to save lives, and animals tend to live longer. That's the takeaway from all this. So here we get into the very specific stuff. Hemangiosarcoma. Anyone that's had that in an animal knows it's pretty much death is coming. It's a horrible, horrible cancer. It's 2% of canine cancer, so it's a low percentage. Vizslas is a very highly inbred dog, but if you look at these are the dogs up there, list them that are most common to get this. I mostly see this in German Shepherds and Goldens. So I don't see a lot of Vizslas though. So, but if you look at the study, okay, if the greater than 12 means they were spayed after 12 months. It doesn't say when, so it could be 13 months, it could be 2 years, and that's one of the studies, the retrospective studies, is that you send out a survey, is your animal fixed? Yeah, well, it could have got fixed yesterday, but you don't know that as a when you're doing the survey, you don't always get that kind of data. Less than 12 months. So you can look at the females there, 1.1% got it, males was 0.6%. And if you look at the intact ones, well, based on this, 0.4% of males, intact males, got hemangiosarcoma, but if they were fixed under 12 months, none of them got it. And I don't think that's necessary. I think animals fixed under 12 months are likely to get it too, because once again, I think it's more breed related. But at the same time, based on this, you could say, well, maybe we should fix them all before 12 months, and it was just, I don't think the sample was big enough, is what it boils down to. If you look at the Goldens, females jump up, and I did see this more commonly in Goldens, but there was no difference in male dogs, none, So the female seems to be, if she's spayed after 12 months, there's a bigger issue. The intact female, it comes in at about 1.6%. Spayed under 12 months is 1.8%. So statistically, that's about the same, So I don't see a real difference there. It kind of boggles the mind in that why is the female affected and not the males? Why is this breed affected and not? So these are complex diseases. I don't think it's just as simple as say because you spayed them, aha, that was the big cause. I think there's a lot we still don't know. And I will go back to, poor breeding is a big factor of this. Osteosarcoma, the most common bone tumor, and it's tends to be deadly. Most of the time, by the time we can diagnose it, something like 80% of the cancer is already spread to other parts of the body. You buy time by amputation or chemotherapy, different things like that. Usually by 2 months with just amputation alone. You can buy 5 months to 10 months with chemotherapy and amputation. There is a new vaccine out. I don't know where that stands. Supposedly that helps. And they can do some amazing things with osteosarc, but you're paying a lot of money. Rottweilers are classic for osteosarc. If you show me a Rottweiler limping on the front leg, and I'll show you an osteo that's over 5 years old, and I'll show you an osteosarc dog 9 times out of 10. And if you look at this, if their Rotties were fixed less than 12 months, you got 28% got, osteosarcoma, developed osteosarcoma over their life. 25% male dogs. That's significant, right? So Rotties are definitely, but why Rotties, compared to the others? And then the intact is only 8%, but the Rotties live longer. And that's the whole point. And if you look at the average age of death of these animals, it's the fixed animals that have a longer lifespan. So, if you're 60 years old versus 80 years old, you're probably more likely to have cancer between 60 and 80 than between 50 and 60. That is just life in general. And it does say at the age of death that, was greater in fixed animals. That's the reality of my reality. They're older, so therefore they're more likely to get that cancer. Goldens, lab, Vizslas, no increased risk of osteosarcoma, fixed or intact. It doesn't matter. The percentage is about the same. And all those other breeds that are prone for these other different diseases. Goldens are classic to look at because they get everything known to man. And I love Goldens, but it's real common for them to get a lot of these different diseases and cancers. But there's no difference. So why do Rotties stand out so much more than the other ones? Once again, breed specific. They do live longer, but they're more prone for it to begin with. Lymphoma, it's a tough one. Vizslas are right up there, and there's your Goldens again. Less than 12 months, 0.3%, still very, very low. Greater than actually, if you wait over 12 months, it's 1.1%. Intact is 0.1%. So, you can look at this, and it's just overall males and females. Another huge study found that intact males had the highest risk for developing lymphoma. That's for the Vizslas. So that so there are conflicting studies out there, and I think that's one of the problems, that we get one study out of one university, and most of the people who are doing the study say they'll actually say in the study, it's a small sample. More research is needed. This was very breed specific, and we did a survey. So there's some holes in our survey. I mean, they actually admit some of their flaws, but it doesn't matter. Once it hits the press and goes out there, other people read it and go, oh, well, you can't fix a Vizsla ever, or you can't do this. I mean, we make these conclusions, and it's the same thing with human medicine. You find about some new drug, and, it's sent from God, and it's going to save everybody's life. And then you find out later that it has all these horrible side effects and it's pulled off the market, So you take everything with a grain of salt, question everything. Golden retrievers, fixed. 9.6%. That is significant. Intact is 3.5. Now, if you wait till after the 12 months, it's 0. And once again, I think this is with female. This is the males in this case, not the females. Females, there's no difference. So, and once again, I just think the data is all over the place, and I don't think we can. And you only hear this. You'll hear these people talk about this. Oh, they're more likely to get this cancer. They're more likely to get that cancer. But it's not, like, okay, are you talking male or female? They don't know. Well, it's just Goldens in general. Well, no, females don't have an increased chance at all based on the data. But I don't believe the data is correct in a lot of ways. So You have to question. Mast cell tumors. Anyone has a boxer knows they get mast cells. Boston, same thing. And they definitely have a much higher. Goldens are in there. And if you look at that, once again, if you wait till they're over a year old, you got 5.7% versus 2.3. Intact is 0. But they found no difference in the males. Why is that? In the labs and Labradors, there's no difference in males or females. Vicious, there's, you look down there, females a little bit higher than males. But if you do them at a younger age, it's less, so I don't know, it's just, I can't even interpret this data. And I spent a lot of time reading this kind of stuff, and I always scratch my head and say, well, where are the loopholes in the data itself? How did we get this? How did we get this information? And have we looked at enough animals? And that's the other thing. And always remember, we're drawn from a population. Excuse me. We're drawn from a population that 80% of animals are fixed, so 20% aren't. So it's skewed already as we do a survey and look at the animals that come through our doors. Orthopedic conditions, and this is where I will give a little bit. I think CCLs, cranial cruciate ligaments. That's like an anterior tear. You ever heard a football player or skier tears their anterior cruciate? That's what it's called, a CCL, cranial cruciate ligament. And the biggest factor is really angle of the knee. And we know that Rotties and pit bulls and the bully type breeds have really weird knee angles. Can have very weird, and some of the bulldogs, just look at their legs, so that's a big issue. That's a genetic issue. Genetic, diet, environment. There's so many factors that go into orthopedic conditions. It's just not that simple to say A equals B, therefore C, and hip dysplasia is another example. Female Goldens not affected by being fixed, but males are, less than 12 months. So here's one. If you do them under 12 months, they have the highest rate. Intact is 1.7. So, it's just, there's a lot of confusion. Labs not affected, don't seem to be affected by being fixed. So males, but females are, and there you go. It's strange. Boxers are more likely to have lameness if they come from a high pre-weaning mortality rate. And so if the breeder has problems with animals dying, you're 2 times more likely to develop. Now, why is that? Why is the other one? Why does one puppy dying in a litter affect the other puppy's growth? But it does, evidently. And slippery floors, that's a real big one in dogs. And we say boxers here because boxers are the survey, but Goldens and Labradors are notorious for this too. We bring them inside, we put them on linoleum floors or hardwood floors, and you'll see them, they'll splay their legs out or they'll slip. And my Golden's getting older, he's doing that more and more, so I got booties on him so he doesn't do that, because I know this will affect his hips. And this was a pretty big study, the 8-year boxer study. So we know there's a lot of factors involved. It's not just as easy. And if you're looking at, I want my dog to live longer, I want to reduce overpopulation. So if you're coming from an individual perspective, I want my dog to live longer. So I'm going to fix them just because of that. And I'm going to give them a good quality of food. All right. If I'm looking at from a Humane Society perspective, I don't want them to breed. So I want to get them fixed. No matter, if we're doing them at 5 weeks, 8 weeks, 7 weeks, doesn't matter. I want to get them fixed. The average age, I think, of animals going into shelters averages about 18 months. So in a lot of ways, and since most of them aren't fixed, you don't really have this discussion. We're forced to spay them or neuter them later. But if we do have puppies or kittens, I personally think we should be doing them. I think we have a moral and ethical obligation to do them as a shelter. I always put this in because Yoke did this study in India, and it just shows that this is what I use when I talk to the officials in different countries. We're trying to do a spay neuter project. They looked at these 7 different body conditions. Number 4 is canine parvovirus. Number 7 is canine infectious hepatitis. Infectious canine hepatitis, Ehrlichia, lepto, fights, fleas, body conditions. So they looked at 3 different cities. One city had animal birth control. ABC means animal birth control since 1994. Jaipur had animal birth control since 2004, and the other one had no animal birth control. And what they found, which is just fascinating to me. This Yoke is not a veterinarian, and he wasn't sure why this happened. It's like, I know why it happened, because animals don't roam as much when they're fixed. But what they found is just overall, the old population, even intact animals in a given area, were healthier. Because once again, if you're reducing the roaming of animals, and when you think back, okay, who's most likely to get hit by a car? Intact male animals. So who's most likely to get in fights? During time of breeding, females will bite males, but then males will fight over females. So a lot of these things happen because they're not fixed. So if you start fixing a whole bunch of them, you actually make the other animals around them even healthier. I just found this a fascinating study, and it's once again, it's backed up really good. He had really good data. So in any event, and they didn't, I mean, they looked at multiple issues too. That's the thing. They found, and all they did was spay them and give them a rabies vaccine, and yet canine infectious hepatitis and parvovirus went down. So think about that one. So it's once again, I see spay neuter as a real solution to a lot of problems. Dr. Bushby's findings, and he's a smart guy. Like I said, he was the head of surgery at Mississippi State University for years, and it's just an amazing human being. But he came to the conclusion: sterilized dogs and cats live longer. Absolutely true. So therefore, they're going to be more prone to get certain things as they live longer. Sterilized dogs have a higher incidence of certain cancers, based on the data that I just showed you, which is kind of questionable, but let's go with that. But we can also say sterilized dogs have a lower incidence of other cancers, and that's true too, especially like breast cancer, and well, not prostate cancer, but perianal hernias, other type things. And sterilized dogs have a higher incidence of some immune diseases. I still question that one because I didn't put that in this presentation, but some of the immune data is iffy at best. Sorry, I lost my page there. Intact dogs are more likely to die of infections and trauma. We absolutely know that's true. And in some breeds, sterilized dogs appear to have a greater incidence of certain orthopedic conditions. And once again, I can kind of agree with that. I think the knees are the biggest single thing. I don't think the hips. I think that's a totally different thing. There's some literature that says fractures. There's a tibial crest, so your kneecap, right below your kneecap, that's your tibial crest, that there's an avulsion that happens more in fixed animals than unfixed animals. Having said all that, every animal I've ever done a tibial crest on, almost without exception, has not been fixed because they're usually younger when it happens. And Hector he got a puppy, and it was old enough to go for a jog with us, but it made a jump and it popped its tibial crest, and we had neutered it like 2 days before. I said, yeah, that's because we neutered it, but it doesn't work like that, and that's the point. So when was the timing of the neuter? We don't always ask those questions. How long was it neutered? So there's once again not always direct correlation or causation, but I don't, there's no question there's probably some issues. But in the end, they live longer, and that's probably the biggest issue, in all honesty. If you're a humane organization, and a lot of you people said you were or associated with it, I've always worked humane organizations. I fire some because I don't agree with what they do. I don't believe in warehousing companion animals. It's never going to solve overpopulation. For 150 years or so, we've built shelters around this country. We put hundreds of millions of dollars in the shelters, and what we need are more low cost, spay neuter facilities and full service hospitals at this point because of economic euthanasia. I'm a real big believer that shelters need to have a full-time vet, should have a behavior on staff, should have a trainer on staff. I think, in the European standards, certainly in England, with Dogs Trust, that's the way they do things, and I'm a big fan of it. It really makes a difference in a lot of animals' life. 50% of animals going in the shelters go in for behavior problems. So, you get them fixed and correct their behavior problem, you might get them right back in the same households, because what do those households do? Many times they just go out and get a different animal. It doesn't solve anything. I think you must ensure no adopted animal will ever reproduce, and I don't think doing spay neuter contracts are worth a darn. I just don't. There's just too many to slip through the holes. Must have, I think, educational campaign. I think you need to be going into schools and changing future by talking to the kids, and the kids will put pressure on the parents. We know that to be true. Prove that all over the world, in all honesty. So it's a positive thing. Behavior modifications and training. You have to have a trainer. You have to, even if you do it remotely, you have to have people that can help you out with behavior issues. That's a real big problem. I don't accept euthanasia as a cornerstone of population control, but there are many things worse than death. And if I had $1 for every time I heard of a shelter being built that said, okay, we're going to house 100 animals, and a year later they have 200 or 300 animals. That's the problem with sheltering. And if you think about no kill, if you're really doing it to the standard of no kill, then you end up with very unadoptable animals. And let's say you have capacity for 50. Well, what happens when you're at 51 or 45 of your animals are really not very adoptable, and only 5 are? Those are all issues you got to ask yourself. And I've never had great pleasure in killing an animal, but for aggression, I absolutely will. For severe disease and pain and suffering, that's not easily fixable. I mean, I can agree with, that's some of the definitions that no kill people live. I can agree with that, but at the same time, I don't believe we should be warehousing animals to warehouse animals. It's not in their best interest psychologically or physically in any way, shape, or form. I think you need to have a spay neuter program, especially with feral cats. You got to get to the cats. We know most of our kittens come now from feral populations, not necessarily from the general public, at least in many places. And I think it's really important to have targeted outreach programs. So, you have to go where the problem is. Build it and they will come. That's true to some degree, and I've proven that. But last weekend, I was up in a small mountain community and we had a great turnout for spay neuter. Next weekend, I'll be in a small mountain community and I think we'll have a great turnout. So, and those places are only an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours from where I have my clinic, but that's too far for people to come, and we give a little bit better price when we go do mobile stuff. So in the end, find the poor areas. We know where they're at. Find the problem areas. We know where they're at and target them. And that's how you'll make a real difference in the long run. My recommendations, well, fixed by 5, and I can't say enough about Esther Meckler pushing the fixed by 5. She got the powers to be to endorse that, which is the AVMA, and many vet associations have. For me, if fixed by 5 is 6 by 5 months. For me, it's 6 by 5 weeks. I don't have a problem with that. So 5 weeks to 5 months, it all works for me. If I'm on the road, 5 weeks it is. At my facility is 5 months. So it kind of depends on the situation. And that for most veterinarians, 5 months should be okay because they have facilities. If you're doing mobile work or you're going into the poor areas, go down to 5 weeks. You'll have much better impact on the future and really decrease the animals. By the time you get back 6 months or a year later, 5-week-old kittens already had a litter. That's just the reality of life. So all humane organizations should have 100% of companion animals fixed prior to adoption. I absolutely believe that, and I still will. And some groups, we just have puppy pushers, as I call them. They go to the reservations or to Texas or to the South where they have a big overpopulation problem. They bring a bunch of puppies up. They're poorly vetted. Many times they bring distemper and parvo with them, and I've seen that multiple times here in Colorado. But they end up just making money off of puppies, and we have a spay neuter contract. They don't follow up on that, and they are puppy pushers for money, is what it boils down to. So are those legitimate humane organizations? Absolutely not in my mind, and they create a lot more problems for us who are actually are in the trenches trying to do the real work. I think all small and medium breed dogs, and I put down there 65 pounds, and I think now I'm probably closer to 75 pounds, but certainly somewhere in that range. If you want to wait for a few months, wait till they're 8 months to 18 months. For a big Great Dane, Mastiff, you might wait till they're 18 months. I'm not 100% convinced it makes a difference one way or the other. I'm not, because I've had some pretty big dogs spayed or neutered at very early ages, and I've had no problems with them, not even knee problems. But I don't, once again, that's a small pool. But I've done, literally thousands and thousands of pre-pubertal animals, and I just haven't had a lot of negative feedback. So fixed by 5, I think, certainly any medium breed dog, small, it's not a male and female, it's not an issue at all. It's not even a question in anyone's mind who's gone through the research. So some of the larger breed dogs, there may still be some questions, but once again, it's causation versus correlation. We need to do a lot more research. And I'm open to the idea for my own animals, not for shelters. For my own animals, I'm open to the idea. What I find is most of my intact males, by the time they're about 12 or 14 months, most people want to get them done because they start acting out. And that's typical of young males in general. So I'm back to the 5 freedoms. Everything we do, everything I've done as a veterinarian, and unfortunately veterinarians don't embrace this necessarily, this is more, it comes from the shelter side. But I just think our whole existence, our reason for being, is to help animals, should revolve around these things. You got to look at the big picture, that freedom from stress, pain, injury, disease, all those kind of things. I've just seen horrible things in no-kill shelters with disease and pain and injury, discomfort, puppies eating other puppies and things. I can't begin. And unfortunately, we have exported the idea of no kill around the world, countries that they just cannot afford it. And I mean that strictly from a financial standpoint. It's just not cost effective, and I hate to bring down life as being cost effective, but there's only so much pie out there. And, if you take a big piece because you're saving 200 animals that you're going to have to take care of for the next 10, 12, 15 years, how much more good could you have done doing something else? And I do think those are the kind of questions we have to ask ourselves. So I think too many of that is about ourselves and not about the animal. And also point out, when I get someone in that doesn't want me to say spay a pregnant cat, or, they call me a murderer for, spaying a pregnant cat, they get upset. The first thing I ask them, well, you must be a vegan vegetarian. And I've never had anyone ever raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm a strict vegan vegetarian. So it's okay to kill when it's convenient for you. It's okay to kill when you want your hamburger, or your pork. And pigs are every bit as smart as dogs and pretty cool actually as pets. Um, but so we put these things in little cubby holes and we forget about our own hypocrisy oftentimes. But it should be, I'm a big picture guy. I want to reduce the total, the most amount of pain and suffering I possibly can. And I think that's the approach we need to take. So this is just on the road. As I say, when we're on the road, we pretty much do anything that has a heartbeat. And there's the 2 pound rule that came out of actually CSU where I graduated, and that was just an arbitrary weight they picked. I usually go down to about a pound, pound and a half. Most 5 weeks old are that big, but I've done smaller than that. But it's the anesthetics have just come so far. It's incredibly safe, and we just don't lose pre-pubes. It's just unheard of. So, and they, literally 2 hours later, they're up eating and playing with each other. That's like nothing ever happened to them. So this is a kitten. Obviously, this is pretty small. So there you go. I think it's about the youngest one I've ever done. And the lady just begged me to do it. She said, you're not gonna be back for a year. And I didn't find it that difficult. So that's not ideal, but you sometimes put circumstances that aren't ideal. And I'll leave you with this in terms of, yes, they can't read or write, but they still know how to multiply. And that's one of my favorite there. Please neuter your pets and weird friends and relatives. If you met my relative, you understand why I like that sign. So I'm a big fan and a spay neuter, and I really believe that it really does make a difference in the end. And I think it's something we need to get back on board, climb back on that horse, because we've kind of let things go, and especially after COVID, it seems like. And part of it is the fact there just aren't enough vets, and I get that. But I think that's going to change here in the near future. But I think we need to try harder. That address is wrong. I'm in Conifer, Colorado now, but everything else on there is right. And I apologize. I should have changed that. I didn't even look at the last page, to be honest with you.
Well, that was an awesome presentation. So this is our question portion of the session. Everyone out there, if you have questions for Dr. Jeff, go ahead and put those into your questions box. And so if you're like me, then I hope you enjoyed that session and all of the breaking down the science for us. And I'm very appreciative that you were able to do that. And show a little love to the dogs. I know that especially if you're familiar with Community Cats podcast and coming to this conference from that side, it can be kind of interesting to see all the dog data. But we wanted to make sure we were talking about our canine friends as well, because I know we have a lot of cat content that just kind of happens right in the space that we're in. But Dr. Jeff, I do want to ask, I think, at least for me, in my perspective, I've been around for about 10 or so years now in this kind of space. I've been hearing more and more about large dogs being an issue to spay and neuter recently. And I was just wondering if you had any insight into why that is, like what has changed to make access, I guess, to spay and neuter for large dogs in particular, more of a talking point now that we need to figure out.
Well, I think it started with the Rottweiler study. I think it was at a University of Minnesota, and they go, oh no, look, there are chances of osteosarcoma went up. They're so much higher, when they're fixed. But once again, they didn't take into account that they live longer, that they're older animals. At time of death, they're, 1, 2, 3 years older. So I think that's part of it. And it's because we cherry pick the things we want to. And a lot of this came from certain veterinarians that were breeders also. Um, so I don't know, UC Davis has produced a lot of kind of negative stuff, but let's say their own studies, they admit there's some flaws in them, and if we know anything about correlation versus causation, retrospective versus prospective. So, they're it's hard to do that kind of science from, and I think the Golden Retriever study, which I think is the Morris Animal Foundation doing that, been going for 7 years now or something, where they followed Goldens from birth all the way through. Now, you can still go back and say, okay, well, was it the same breeder? So what was the lineage of that particular breed, since these are all purebred Goldens? So how they're bred really makes a difference, and I think that's the biggest single thing. When all these things have a genetic component to them or a breed specific components, because we know certain cancers are much higher in certain animals. Okay, you can't just say it's from spay and neuter then, because why isn't all the animals have it? If it's from spay and neuter. So I think once again we put the cart in front of the horse several times.
All right, thank you for that. And so let's see. I was also wondering, because you kind of have more of a global perspective, and you mentioned how we have exported the idea of no kill, but I know you have your Planned Pethood International. And so kind of what is your sense of spay neuter? I know that we're very focused here at United Spay Alliance about the United States, but kind of what is happening spay neuter globally, from your perspective?
When I first started going to Slovakia, they didn't even know how to spay neuter. And it just wasn't done because the German influence. In Germany, they can kind of consider it a mutilation. A lot of people don't do spay neuter. They don't think it's natural. Okay, well, but they still do shots. Well, there's nothing natural about a shot. But ignoring that fact, Germany doesn't have an overpopulation problem because once again, they seem to be very regimented, and they take their dogs out on leashes and on walks. They don't let them run free. So if you don't have an overpopulation problem, it's easy to say, well, we don't really need to spay neuter them, so I understand that. Now, I would still do it because my dog's going to live longer, and I know that. In Slovakia, I was teaching vets how to do spay neuter for the first time, and they just didn't feel comfortable with it. And anesthetics are an issue. When I was in the Ukraine, all they had was xylazine, which is a horrible drug. It's not meant to be an anesthetic, 100% anesthetic on its own. It's just kind of a sedation thing. And they have incredible drops in blood pressure, and that's what they were using to do spay neuter. And I was mortified. So you see different things around the world. I will say this: in Mexico, and I'm in Mexico right now, getting ready to do a big spay neuter clinic. It's just taken off down here. The universities have embraced things. We have Spay International, Spay Global, and Spay Mexico. Craig started that, and we're in different universities. We have a whole training program. I'm on the board of directors for that. So they go through a written course and then a hands-on course. We have our training center. Dr. Tony's all over the place. He does outings 2 or 3 times a month. It's spay neuter is just caught on because once again, it's a simple solution for a major problem. And a lot of people will go as an example, go to Progreso in the Merida or in the Yucatan, and they'll go, yeah, they're street dogs. Yeah, they are, but start looking at them. They're all fixed, they're fat, they're happy, and that wasn't that way just a few years ago. And once again, we also know they have less fleas, less ticks. When we first started doing surgery there, fleas and ticks would just be crawling all over the tables. You start scratching yourself because there's so many ticks, literally hundreds of them. And by the third or fourth year, you barely see one. It's like there's one or two, you see 3 or 4. It's like, oh, we have a tick problem. Like, no, that's nothing like it used to be. So the difference is absolutely profound and amazing. And anyone that works in the field understands that. They know that. If you haven't been there, if you're sitting up in your ivory tower, you have no clue what's going on in real life.
And so with that idea, I do have a question. What advice do you have for a veterinarian wanting to make an impact on this issue and make a move from private practice to low-cost care for needy communities?
With the Humane Organization. I get calls and requests every week. Can you send me a vet? Can I borrow your vet? Can you come and work for us? Can you open a clinic here? Build it and they will come. If you're a private vet and you want to open a low-cost clinic, feel free to come out to my place, see how we do things, It's possible. I have consulted several different big groups that say, you know, okay, we have the spay neuter program, but it's costing us too much money. We can't maintain it. Well, then you find out they're like using an example, PDS, which is a top, don't get me wrong, it's a great suture material, but it's just twice as expensive as the suture material I use. And I feel like my suture material is every bit as good, you know? So there's ways you can cut corners without cutting corners, I guess is the point. And you have to become proficient. You know, I mean, my average dog space is about 12 minutes. There's people who are faster than that, but I can do that all day long. You know, I work 12 hours a day sometimes, and my dog space at the end of the day is 12 minutes, just like at the beginning of the day. You know, so I feel like they're all the same. So I think there's, you know, get better at what you do. And there are grants and money out there. You know, learn how to. I've never been good at begging for money. I'll be honest with you. I just work harder, try to make a little bit more. Um, but you know, there's grants out there. There's people to talk to, and there's people that are willing to hire a vet. That you know, I mean, vets, spay neuter vets can make really good money right now. I could stop what I'm doing. I work pretty much 7 days a week. I could go part time, work 3 days a week doing just spay neuter, and make 3 times the amount of money I'm making right now. So it's very tempting, but you know, I'm really into economic euthanasia, and we provide Dr. Petra does 2 or 3 bone surgeries every day, you know, that are getting $10,000 quotes, you know, and I'm talking major bone surgery requiring plates and screws and all that kind of stuff. And I'm doing just a truckload of explorers and gastrotomies and different things because of the quotes that people don't have a choice. They're going to put their animal to sleep, you know, so that luckily they find us. So.
Well, thank you so much. We are at the end of our time with Dr. Jeff, and I do want to just thank you. As he's mentioned, he is down in Mexico right now, getting ready to go out there and spay and neuter some animals. And
Yeah.
so thank you so much for what you're doing. And how many animals are y'all planning to spay and neuter again?
We got, I think, 326 today, and I think there's 7 of us, so we'll get them done.
And so,
But
yeah,
we
you're
got
going
a
to have
bunch of
about
university,
800.
and we got a bunch of university students coming in, you know, to help carry animals and stuff. So we'll be doing some training too. So
Outstanding. Well, we're so grateful for you. Thank you so much for your time and logging in. And so I hope you have a successful clinic this weekend.